Hello, everybody. This is Joshua, and today we are going to be talking about relaying information. Okay, so what is a relay? Well, if we look down here at this picture, you're going to see a relay race. And what happens in a relay? Well, we've got a baton, and this is the most important thing, right? The people don't matter as much, it's the baton that is going to be passed from one person to another person, right? So right here, he's going to give it to the next guy. But we have to remember that this baton actually came from another person. So he got this, and now he's giving it to the next person. And in this baton, this piece of metal, represents the information, right? So when we relay information, somebody gives us information and then we give it to somebody else. So we're passing along the information. Now, if we look over here, this is a very popular game that we play at parties, and it is all about relaying information. So the first person has a word, and they pass it to the next person, and they pass it to the next person, and they pass it, and they pass it, right? Now this game is called telephone usually. And what you can see here, peas, bees, knees, cheese, and fleas. So as you hear information, your brain is processing it, and sometimes you hear wrong or there can be a mistake, and over time the message tends to change a little bit, and by the end you have a totally different message. This is one of the problems with relaying information, is that it's not always accurate. It's not always 100% correct. But nevertheless, we're going to look at some of the language that we use to relay information, and this will be very important for our presentation number 1, where you are talking to someone else, learning about their information, and then relaying it or passing it to everybody else, right? So you're not giving your own information, you're giving somebody else's information. But this also is very, very important when we start doing academic presentations, because you're going to be relaying research, right? That's the information you're going to be passing along to everybody. All right, so sometimes we need to explain other people's ideas to a different person, right? Not our ideas, but we need to tell somebody else about an idea that we heard. So in everyday life, we're going to use expressions such as he or she told me that. Okay, so for example, Daniel told me that he has trouble sleeping lately because of stress. Right? Daniel told me that he has had trouble sleeping lately because of stress. Has had a little bit difficult here, but it's the perfect tense with the verb have. So this is a grammatical have to show perfect tense, and this is the actual I have it. He has had trouble sleeping lately because of stress. He said that is almost exactly the same. Another one is I have heard that. Now this one's really nice because you don't necessarily have to say who told you. It's just someone told you, right? So you're not saying exactly who said it, you're just saying that you heard it. It's not your information. Very similar, I hear that. Now what's the difference between I have heard and I hear that? Not a lot. This I hear that is a little bit more current. So if you say I hear that, it's more like a recent rumor, whereas I have heard that is a little bit more vague or unclear about the time. But you can pretty much use both of these to be the same. I've heard that going outside is dangerous because you could get sick. I've heard that the coronavirus sticks to hard surfaces, for example. These would be ways that I would use that. And then also, I hear that school won't be back for much later than they originally thought. So that would be another example if I hear that. Here's another example of, this is mostly for rumors, for knowledge that is currently being talked about a lot, or that people are sharing information a lot. Sort of like popular information. You say, people are saying that. People are saying that it's not safe to go outside. People are saying that it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm sorry. These are all really grim and sad examples of relaying information, but right now all of the information outside is negative, right? It's kind of a scary time because of that. Now, in academic presentations, we tend to use slightly more formal language. So one of the most common examples of that is according to, and this is one that I would just memorize and use a lot. I use it a lot in my writing, and I also use it a lot in my speaking. We can do both, right? So according to, you can use the person's full name, you could use their last name. In academic writing, we tend to use just the last name, right? And if we're doing APA citation, we would need to put the year in as well, right? But in speaking, we're more likely to use the full name. So here's an example. Paul Nation is a really famous second language professor and researcher. He really thinks about vocabulary a lot. That's one of his big areas of study, is how much vocabulary you need to understand. And so according to Paul Nation, English speakers need a very, very large vocabularies for accurate listening comprehension. I kind of didn't say that very well, but I'll do it again. According to Paul Nation, English speakers need very large vocabularies for accurate listening comprehension. So this is telling you that this is not my idea. I don't think that English speakers need large vocabularies. Paul Nation does. It's his idea. Okay. Again, full name and last name says that. That's a little closer to what we looked at before, but it's still okay. You can still use that for academic presentations, right? So Nation says that English speakers need very large vocabularies. If it's coming from a written source, use the writing verb. If you're reading something, it's okay to say says. We tend to use says as just sort of a bigger blanket term for communicates. But if it's actually writing, if you read something, say you read it and say that they wrote it. So Nation writes that. We believe in our ideas. So thinks, believes, all of these will kind of be the same, right? So Nation believes that English speakers need large vocabularies. That's great. Has found. Has found is a little bit more for studies. If you're reading somebody that's done some research, we find results to our research, right? So I would say according to a study by Paul Nation, he found that, or I might say in a study, maybe not according to, but in a study, Paul Nation has found that. Or you don't have to make it the perfect tense. You could also just use found. Paul Nation found that English speakers need very large vocabularies for accurate listening comprehension. Okay, now here's just some useful verbs that you could use instead, right? And all of these will pretty much work, and some of them we've already used, but claims, writes, says, believes, posits. To posit is to put down. It kind of works exactly the same as writing, right? You can use it instead of writing, but it's a little bit more broad than write. But it's a good word if you are using... if you don't want to just keep saying, he says that, he says that, he says that, especially in writing, you want to be careful about repeating yourself. So posit, and I'm sorry if you're not paying attention to which one I'm on, it's here, posit. Posit can be a really nice word to use. It sounds very complicated. Describes, explains, and identifies. So these are all good verbs that we can use in these parts of the sentence instead of this. Okay. It can also be a very good idea to say where you found the information, right? So saying that somebody else said it is great. That's awesome. But the more information you give, the more credible or believable or accurate your speaking will be. So I recently read an article that says, that's good. You're at least saying where you found it. I watched a news report on the CDC that claims recently here, this is just for style, really. I mean, you don't really have to say when you saw it, but it's kind of nice to show that it's a new, something you saw new. But you could just say, I read an article that says that. Recently is not necessary in this situation. So here's another one. I recently read Malcolm Gladwell's new book, Talking to Strangers, and he writes that, right? All of these are going to have the word that. He says that. He claims that. Well, not this one, I'm sorry, because it's that claims. But he writes that. According to a recent study by Harvard University, according to a 2015 study by Harvard University on the effects of drinking alcohol and studying English. Which one is the strongest one of those? I know this one might be harder to say, but you're giving a lot more information in that sentence than something like this, right? So it's always a good idea to try to say where things come from. And when you're speaking, if you're comfortable, it's going to be easier to put all of that information into your relaying of information. So let's look at some examples from Amy Cuddy. The first one is right at the beginning, and we've looked at this in the video, but for example, Natalie Ombody, a researcher at Tufts University, shows that when people watch 30 seconds soundless clips of real physician-patient interactions, their judgments of the physician's niceness predict whether or not that physician will be sued, right? Natalie Ombody shows that. Here's that sentence that we were talking about, right? Natalie Ombody shows that when people watch 30-second soundless clips, right? That's what they do. So notice that she's added some more information here. She's given you where that person works and what job they do, right? Why did she do that? How does that help? Instead of just saying Natalie Ombody shows that. Well, Natalie Ombody is not a very famous researcher. Most people wouldn't know who Natalie Ombody is, but they might know Tufts University. So by showing you where she comes from, it adds to that person's expertise, meaning that they're more of an expert. And this is what we want to do. We want the people that we're giving the information from to be a higher level than us, usually, especially for research information like this, right? So if I say, hey, my friend Tom told me that, or if I say, the Prime Minister of Canada said that, the Prime Minister is going to be better because, quite honestly, he's a more reliable expert source. Right? So who you are talking about is important too, right? Not just what they say, but who said it. Here's another example. Even more dramatic, Alex Todorov at Princeton has shown us that judgments of political candidates' faces in just 1 second predict 70% of U.S. Senate and gubernatorial race outcomes. Okay. Again, we've done the same thing. Alex Todorov has shown us. So a little bit different, right? We've used a different verb tense. We've used the perfect tense, right? So we have the past participle shown instead of the present tense shows, has shown us. The meaning's not that different, right? But it's nice to change the verb tense because these come right after each other. So it gives a little bit more difference in the sound of these two instead of just repeating the same structure. It doesn't really change the meaning, though. I mean, it's a research. He has shown us. This sounds maybe like he's done it more than once because remember, we use the perfect verb tense to talk about things that happen in the past and continue to happen, right? Not just one time in the past, but over a large period of time in the past. So perhaps this one, Todorov, he's shown us many times. He's done this experiment more than once. That maybe would be the difference in the meaning. Okay, so here's another one. This expression, which is known as pride, Jessica Tracy has studied. She shows that. Now you'll notice that Amy Cuddy is really just using the same verb here again and again, right? She shows that. But again, she's using the person's name. She's not telling you where they come from. But she's showing you that it's a researcher because she studied it. Okay? She shows that people who are born with sight and people who are congenitally blind do this when they win at a physical competition. That was the arms up in the air, if you remember. But our question really was, do our nonverbals govern how we think and feel about ourselves? There's some evidence that they do. Now, this is the most vague. She's not telling us where it comes from at all. She's just telling us that there's evidence, that there is research, right? And sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes you just need to say, research has found that, or a study has found that, and you don't need to be more specific. But again, like I said, the more specific you are, the more you say where and who and why, right? That will give your information more credibility. So we have this evidence both that the body can shape the mind, at least at the facial level, and also that role changes can shape the mind. Okay, so there you go again, the evidence. So this is what we find. Risk tolerance, which is the gambling. We find that when you are in the high power pose condition, 86% of you will gamble. When you're in the low power pose condition, only 60%. And that's a whooping significant difference. Okay, here we go. So this is what we find. And why did she do this? Why is it this is what we find? It's because it's her research. But it's not only hers, and that's why it's we, because it's her and the people she works with, right? She's involved in a research study, but it's not just her. It's her and other people. Okay? That's what Marianne Forge calls standing in social quicksand. And this is also really great. This is using someone else's words. So you're using a term or an expression from somebody else. That's what Marianne LaFrance calls. That's what her name for this situation is, right? This person uses this or has made up this expression. So you're showing where the expression comes from. Okay, so in conclusion, we want to make sure that we're clearly showing when our information comes from somebody else. Not from us, but from somebody else. So we can use expressions like this. He said that, she said that, according to, this person has shown us. Those are all really good and powerful expressions to help people know that you are not the one who has made this information, that you've heard it from somebody else, and that you are giving it to us.